welcome you to tonight's Citizens Climate University. It's a weekly webinar program of Citizens Climate Lobbies that provides CCL supporters like you and I with access to in-depth training opportunities on topics related to climate change and effective climate advocacy. I'm your host, Brett Cease, and tonight's training topic is the whole shebang. We are getting ready for Washington, D.C., and we'd love to help you plan your meeting with Congress. We know that lobbying can be both exciting and intimidating, and being prepared is one of the ways to reduce that anxiety. So let's jump right in with the specific training in those steps to really get you prepared. To do that, what I'd love to do, and who's joining us tonight as our presenter, is none other than the wonderful CCL Mid-Atlantic Co-Coordinator, Sabrina Fu. And I'll just give a quick bio behind her, and then we'll get this process up and running. So as a scientist who's always worked on practical problems, from synthesis of alcohols, from waste gases, to remediation of nuclear, mixed, and hazardous wastes, Sabrina began her career thinking that science was the key to solving societal problems. Working on large issues of alternative energy sources and waste management, she realized the limitations of science alone to solve these problems, and seeing the beauty of CCL's focus on a bipartisan solution and their approach to listening to concerns, she joined and became the group leader for Howard County in 2015, and then a year later, the co-coordinator for the Mid-Atlantic region. So we are so lucky to have you join us tonight, Sabrina, and I'll pass the baton to you in just one moment. But if we've done our job well, our agenda tonight is going to lay out the following 5 or 6-fold agenda. And I'll just slow down and just say for a quick moment, if you're like me at least, the very first time that you got ready to lobby, I think it's really important to acknowledge that for many of us, getting ready to meet with our Congress, can feel like an intimidating process. Hollywood's coverage at times hasn't really particularly helped with the most accurate depiction. And so really what we're doing with this series of trainings is empowering our volunteer network to remember that the most powerful tool that we have in our box is still dialogue from real-life, authentic citizen advocates like yourself. And this webinar is a part of the larger Working with Congress series of trainings to really help our newer volunteers especially get ready for DC. So you can see tonight we're going to discuss what you can do to prepare yourself for a successful meeting with a member of Congress. And specifically, we're going to highlight research tips, available tools on community and where to find them, our lobby meeting roles that we recommend, the value of practice, and the power of listening with a real life, actual putting it all together in a practice scenario. So let's jump in and actually talk about the importance of research and the tools that we provide our lobby teams. What we're going to actually do to do that is focus on biographies, meeting notes and plans, studies and reports, and our study guide tonight. So let's jump right in with biographies. And you can see here on this screen, the first tool for doing research is really the CCL Congressional Biography. A bio comes publicly available from information that we grab from different databases. There's a lot out there, as you can imagine, on members of Congress. We update each of these before every major lobby event, and we really help you tee up finding out about your member this way in case you don't have a lot of background, really. Now, just a couple of informations as far as where you can find that. I put a link to that in the chat. And what you can expect on your biography is going to be the data on the members of Congress, schools they've attended, their backgrounds in careers and interests, as well as their religious background or appreciations you can glean from a lot of the votes that they've taken in the past related to climate, if they have. The congressional record, again, voting records, and some of the district and state data, including the demographics, major industries or employers, major donors, you name it. All of that's available along with concerns that have been expressed by interested constituents, and as well as how that member has actually arrived at their own decisions. It's going to be important for you as you prepare for DC to review the biography along with the previous meeting minutes that Sabrina is going to review in just a moment, so you can really know and anticipate questions that might come up in that meeting. You can also develop an understanding and who are the people within his or her peer groups that influence that member. And I also recommend, if you have time or if you're really, a go-getter, you might want to go to govtrack.org. It's another great website. We recommend checking them out so you can do some additional personal research on recent votes, statements that they've made, so you can issue other appreciations, reading more about their stances and any other connections that you might have to build off of. And the key thing is here, I'll show you where to actually go. So once you click on that link, you'll see this page here. It says Members of Congress bios, and this is within community. And then from there, if you click on those, whether it's the House or the Senate bios, you can see the specific list of the different names. If you click on one of these, we do recommend scrolling to the bottom since they load slowly depending on your connection. You'll see a specific representation, like, for example, Representative Spayan. And then if you'd like to prepare an actual printout ahead of time, we will give you these on the 6th. They'll be mailed June 6th to everyone for their final lobby assignments. But you can click on this little print button, and then from there you can see easily the little print dialog for you to be able to print that off ahead of time. So that's just a quick overview of what's on the biography, and I'll actually pass it to you, Sabrina, to just talk about meeting minutes and the important role they play first.
Thank you so much, Brett. So let's first discuss meeting minutes. So you can see here on the screen a redacted example of meeting minutes. Previous meeting minutes represent information that was shared in confidence in meetings between Congressional Office and CCL volunteers over the years, and we consider them to be confidential. This is some of the most sensitive information CCL possesses. If leaked, this information could destroy the trust CCL has been building in Congress for over a decade. So please be very careful with these meeting minutes. We send past minute notes to liaisons and lobby meeting leaders. The liaison or meeting leader may share the previous minutes with you, or they may simply give you a summary. We do not share our notes with anyone outside of CCL, and we trust our volunteers to keep the information confidential. If you want to prepare to address questions, concerns, or misconceptions, then by all means read past meeting notes to receive them. For example, if meeting notes indicate questions about border adjustment in the last 2 meetings, be prepared for it to come up again. Acknowledge that you understand the border adjustment is a concern you take seriously, and be ready to provide answers to any questions they might have about border adjustments. Or if the meeting minutes shows that the staffer expressed concern about the cost of collecting the fee and distributing the dividend, then you should research that question and be prepared to answer that in the meeting. Think of the analogy. We've all had teachers who would drop hints like, you might want to know this material, you might see this material soon, or this section is important, and somehow those material magically appears in the test, right? That's what our meeting minutes are for. It's like the member of Congress telling us what might be on the test. So be prepared to acknowledge and address the concerns or issues raised in previous meetings. However, you should also not be surprised if a different issue comes up in this meeting. Because after all, a lot has occurred in the world in the past 3 to 6 months, which is typically how long ago we've seen the members of Congress. And sometimes you don't even have the same person that you see because there's a different staffer there, right? So the important thing is to listen and make connections with the staffer and or member of Congress. So going back to the test analogy, you might also get some help cramming for your exam in the form of a meeting plan that the liaison or groups closest to the member have put together in preparation for the meeting. It will feature the following 4 elements, which we'll go into more detail a little bit later: the primary goal, the appreciations, the supporting ask, and plan for discussion.
Thanks so much, Sabrina. So let's jump into a couple other elements, and then we'll actually pause for some questions here for this first section. And I'll just say this too. So you can see here highlighted, CCL has a lot of studies that have either been commissioned by us or other important organizations that are doing this kind of research, or even agencies like the Department of Treasury that you can also use if you're interested to prepare for a lobby meeting and just get a general sense of some of the details you might be curious about. The beautiful thing is that we actually have all of these resources on one web page, and that's on Community, and I'll just put a link to that in the chat here right now. And you can essentially go to this link and see all of these resources listed. So if you go to Community and then you click on Resources and Training, all resources, you can also scroll down to that Studies and Reports accordion tab, that category, and this is all the wealth that we have available here for you. So I'm not going to highlight each of these. You're welcome to explore them on your own depending on your interests or what you think might be relevant for your member. But the REMI report, again, has regional summaries as well as the district and the state level data that's available with the household impact studies. We have a wonderful dividend delivery study that looks at the process for how the dividend would actually be administered and the costs involved and the apparatus and the agencies that would be involved. It was actually commissioned by CCL and run by a former Department of Treasury employee of 40 years, one of the architects of the Bush and Obama era tax cut. And we also have the Treasury's carbon tax analysis. And so each of these are really key if you're interested in learning a particular angle. For example, the REMI study examined the economic, climate, fiscal, power, demographic impact of what would happen if we put a steadily rising fee on carbon-based fuels and looked at that from a macroeconomic lens. The household impact study is a little bit different. It examines the net financial impact of various socioeconomic groups of the US households, and then looked at that from year one of what would happen if something like the Energy Innovation Act would be introduced. We also have a great data set that I just highlight too. This is relatively new. It just came about in the last month, and if you haven't seen it yet and you're curious about some of the other questions, recommend checking out that Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act data set, because it does show specific projections for emission reductions, for what the dividend would be year by year for this actual bill. So all of that's available in the link that I just put to a chat, and none of that is mandated, but it's there for you if you're interested. I will highlight one other element, and I'll actually pass it to you, Sabrina, to really walk us through what to expect with the conference guide. But this is really your one-stop shop if you're curious about really what to do to prepare for Lobby Day.
So those of you who have lobbied previously, we had suggested a set of laser talks for everyone to study in advance of June Lobby Day. So, Brett has gone through some of the things in the guides here, but I just wanted to mention, and I actually reviewed some of it. It's just really full of things. So there's a lot of hot links in there. You don't have to click on all the hot links, but it is really helpful. Like you say, well, I might want to look at some of this. So go ahead and, spend as little as much time as you can take to do this. We really appreciate, by the way, I'm so impressed that you guys have taken off time to really prepare for this meeting. It's very impressive. Thank you. And we hope that you feel free to ask questions anytime. Oh, okay. So I think we're going to pause for questions really soon. So anyway, we found that the meeting goes a lot better if we stop and ask what people are thinking after we shared information, right? We hope that by studying this information, you'll internalize it and be able to strike a good balance between listening and sharing information. So when I can describe, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act in my own words, I'm a much better listener and be able to listen to what they have to say rather than be distracted, like, what am I going to say next? How am I going to respond if they have this question or that question? When I can listen actively, I'm better able to pick up underlying values behind someone else's words and connect with them on values. And connecting with values open doors. The study guide is only 2 pages long, as we said before, has a lot of hot links to it. So if you become well-versed on this topic, you're confident in it, but you don't have to be well-versed in everything. We'll talk a little bit later about how once you get to know a team, we're working as a team, right? So hopefully you'll find that different team members are strong on different points. And remember to check your previous lobby notes to get clues on what topics the staffer or the member of Congress might be concerned with. And that's an area you can focus on as well.
Yeah, lobbying is a team sport, and we definitely just want to uplift the fact that none of us are going to be experts in anything. We're all citizens. We're all busy with our own lives. And so really you can lean on each other in this process too. Well, one of the ways that we can do that is really being strategic in how we set up the roles that we have for the meeting. So let's talk quickly and switch gears here a little bit to just discussing some of the roles that we can have and clarifying right off the bat what the level of comprehension might be for that office. And I'll pass it to you, Sabrina, to kind of start us off here. Okay,
thanks, Brett. So as you get closer to your meeting, we'll want to begin thinking about the different roles we can play. So we have a variety of roles for volunteers in these meetings, and we'll review each one of these roles. So please keep in mind, these roles are merely suggestions, right? You could have, sometimes there are more roles than there are people, sometimes the opposite, so be flexible about it. So if you have past experience meetings with your Congress member staff, you'll know best which role apply and which roles do not apply. Please be flexible. the roles are suggestions, as we said, and you know, please remember that remember what we do in the meeting is what's most important, and that we have somebody committed to doing the meeting. So sometimes we could get all flustered and forget, for example, to leave the one page behind if we don't have it assigned. So we may ask volunteers to fill more than one roles. So for example, if you have 4 teammates, right, and then you'll notice that there are more than 4 roles. So we invite you to be willing to take on more than one roles. There's one last thing we want to point out. We want everyone to feel comfortable contributing during the discussion, right? So you're not just stuck in those roles. So let's talk about leaders and liaisons now. So we have one CCL volunteer for every congressional office. We have one volunteer who is offered to be the face of CCL in any particular congressional office, and we call that person a liaisons. Liaisons built up a personal relationship with these offices, with the office that they assign to. They maintain regular contact, they act as a source of information, and they provide updates to CCL on CCL progress to the office. Often the liaison will serve as a meeting leader as well. This provides continuity for the congressional office and for CCL. Sometimes the liaison isn't present in the meeting, so an experienced CCL volunteer will serve as the meeting leader instead. This brings us to the meeting leader. Okay, so the meeting leader, sorry, I'm a little behind. The meeting leaders are basically like a conductor, right? The leader assigns roles to the other volunteer. The leader empowers everyone to share and participate, especially the constituents. The leader may choose to be in charge of handling the transition between different parts of a meeting. And certainly the leader helps conversation keep on track and help things wrap up on time. The leaders can help the team settle on appropriate and supporting asks for the meeting. So the leader is a good conductor. Most of the time, the other people are doing the playing.
I love it. So let's dive into a couple of the other roles here too. We'll break down a couple others, like Sabrina started this off here. So the asker is somebody that can feel comfortable and confident in stating our one ask, right? So we have a little bit of a variation depending on the House or the Senate. In the House, we're asking our members to co-sponsor HR 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. In the Senate, we're really focused on bipartisanship, given that our legislative team feels that this is going to be most helpful in moving the Senate forward on bill introduction. Both of those actual resources are available in community. You can find out. I'll actually put a link to that chat, to that resource in the chat here. And the key thing also just to remember is the primary ask, you want to listen carefully and be direct with it. And then also be prepared to make sure that they actually can respond and not move on without getting a response first. So here's a link to it in the chat. And what that actually might sound like is something like this. Representative Smith, our big goal is to get effective national legislation passed. And as you know, we would love you to co-sponsor the Energy Innovation Act. It's legislation that puts a fee on carbon and returns all the proceeds back to American households. Is that something you can support? If yes, you can continue on. That's terrific. Let's talk next steps. And then you can ask them to do something more that you figured out to move those along and to really continue to highlight, how to get in touch with the actual office of Representative Deutsch. If no, you can ask anything else as a follow-up and be prepared to have that dialogue, something like, could you tell us more about what you'd actually need to be, more comfortable supporting this? Or, what do you actually specifically object to in the proposal so that we can work on that in the district? Also, at this point, if they're not ready to fully support the Energy Innovation Act, we know that some offices that might be quite the stretch. What we're really prepared to do is have a supporting ask following up. So here's the difference in at least my mind between the primary ask and the supporting asks outlined on this slide. With the primary ask, you swing for the fences. You're not going to negotiate with yourself or weaken your offer. You want to wait for that answer and really step forward into that ask during the meeting so that the member or the staffer knows specifically why you're there. Now, on the supporting ask side, we're actually going to be joined in just a moment by one of our legislative directors who's going to give some specific bill recommendations and details. but you want to think strategically on how you can move that member forward with a smaller step, whether it's other legislation that's out there, whether it's something that you can work on back home in the district, whether it's hosting an actual committee hearing on an element connected to this, you name it. There's a lot of specific and actionable steps that you can actually take. And this year, what CCL has done is actually identified 3 bipartisan bills that have been introduced this Congress that also could be helpful supporting asks. Now, our primary objective in promoting these bills is to encourage bipartisanship on climate in Congress. These bills are complementary to the Energy Innovation Act. They address policy issues that a carbon price doesn't, right? We know that this isn't the only solution. And so CCL isn't formally endorsing these bills, but we believe that they're worthwhile for members of Congress to consider and will also help move that needle in the right direction. You can use your best judgment when deciding whether or not you want to make one of these bills one of your supporting asks. If any of them, for example, might feel like a source of conflict with your group, you can pick a different one too. And we also want you to ask your member in the support for any of these bills. You can do the research on your own to see, first off, to make sure they're not already supporting it. That would be a gaffe. And also to be prepared to answer any questions that might come up without input, from CCL staff. So feel a little bit comfortable and confident in what these bills also entail. Ben's going to walk you through that in just a little bit. We will also highlight that this list isn't exhaustive. There's a lot of other climate bills out there. If there's a bill that your group would actually like to use as a secondary or supporting ask that isn't on this list, please feel free to contact Ben. I'm going to put his link to his email in the chat here as well. It's just simply ben@citizensclimate.org. And we also know that, for groups throughout the country, a lot of you have been working on other supporting asks, such as holding a bipartisan briefing on local climate impacts in your community, or doing a site visit, or holding a public forum. It's fine to also contribute those too. At this time, it's important to note that the Climate Solutions Caucus is actually still not reorganized, but once it is, that's another supporting ask that you could also make, especially for new members of Congress. Let's hear him walk through these 3 bills that we've highlighted, and then we'll move forward with the rest of the asks.
Sure. I should note the 3 bills that we have here are not, this is not an exhaustive list of good climate bills. There are a lot of other good bills out here. These are just a couple we thought we'd start with because of their bipartisan nature and the fact that they could probably pass in the next 18 months. The first is the Disclosing Aid Spent to Ensure Relief Act, otherwise known as the Disaster Act. Its lead co-sponsors are Rep. Peters from California and Rep. Meadows from North Carolina. It currently has 9 Democratic co-sponsors and 4 Republicans. The bill is pretty simple. It just requires the Office of Management and Budget to submit an annual report to Congress on the amount of disaster-related spending by the federal government. The report must include all federal obligations related to disaster response, recovery mitigation efforts, and administrative costs associated with this. And of course, the federal government can always make better decisions when it has good information, and a lot of these disasters, as we know, are directly related to climate change. And the other aspect of all these bills is we believe they are complementary to the Energy Innovation Act. Nothing in the Innovation Act will force Congress to require more reporting. So this bill would be needed even if the bill we all want to see passed was passed tomorrow. We could still use this bill being put into play. The next act is the Utilizing Significant Emissions with Innovative Technologies Act. All these have great names, don't they? Otherwise known as the Use It Act. Is introduced by Senator Barrasso and Senator Whitehouse in the Senate, and again, Congressman Peters and Rep. McKinley in the House. In the Senate, it has 8 Democratic co-sponsors and 5 Republicans. In the House, it has 12 Democrats and 6 Republicans. The Use It Act is specific to carbon capture. While our bill does have provisions for carbon capture at qualified facilities, it really doesn't address direct air capture technologies. What this bill would do is it would authorize $35 million in competitive prize funding for direct air capture technologies and allocate $50 million toward research and development of technologies that transform carbon dioxide into commercial products. It also facilitates the construction and development of carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration infrastructure products. I went over a little bit like why it's complementary to our bill, because our bill really doesn't address this direct air capture. And the last bill we've identified for the June fly-in is the Coastal Communities Ocean Acidification Act of 2019. It was introduced by Senator Lisa Murkowski and Senator Whitehouse again. In the House, it's been introduced by Rep. Pingree and one of our favorite members of Congress, Francis Rooney. In the Senate, it has 3 Democratic co-sponsors and 1 Republican and 1 independent. In the House, it has 6 Democratic co-sponsors and 3 Republicans. This is another reporting bill. It would amend the Coastal Communities Ocean Acidification Act and Research Monitoring Act of 2009 by requiring the Secretary of Commerce through NOAA to update a report once every 7 years that assesses the social economic impacts of ocean acidification on coastal communities. The research will also focus on identifying coastal communities which are most dependent on ocean resources and would be impacted the most by ocean acidification. It also identifies specific risks and threats communities face and finding possible adaptation strategies. It would also require the Secretary of Commerce and NOAA to submit a report to Congress 180 days after the bill passes, detailing the efforts of NOAA to support the state and local community vulnerability assessments and strategic research planning. Once again, nothing in our bill would make the Department of Commerce do this kind of things, but this information will be vital as we make the case for why a bill like ours is needed, because while this doesn't directly address ocean acidification, only something like our bill that actually mitigates the problem will do that. This will be useful information, and we think these can pass in a bipartisan manner in a short time frame.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ben. And with that, I'll be happy to pass it back to you, Sabrina. And again, feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat as we move forward. I know that Ben went through a lot there, and we'll make sure to get to them in the Q&A time.
Well, I hope that gives you some idea of all the different ways that we're trying to be complementary to everything else that's on the minds of members of Congress. And I love the emphasis on bipartisanship. So let's jump back into exploring some of the other roles. So let's talk about note takers. The note taker is actually a very important role. So if possible, the leader will put a very experienced lobbyist in this role, because an experienced lobbyist picks up on the subtleties in the conversation and quickly identifies important emerging themes. Also, experienced lobbyists are very well aware of body language and the mood, as well as what the staff and members of Congress are saying. So great note takers help us both locally and nationally. Locally, the notes keep a running record of where our members of Congress stand and how a member's position has evolved over time. It also helps inform future meetings and ensure solid meeting follow-ups. Excuse me. And our notes also enable us to to act on action items that we otherwise might forget and help us pass on knowledge when a group of liaison changes its leadership. And nationally, of course, our notes gives us a sense of the national picture and identify congressional trends. For those of you who have been to November Lobby Days, you'll see that Danny gives us these national trends from our notes.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of what Sabrina just said here, what does an actually good note taker take during the course of the meeting? Well, we actually have a whole training on that. It's just called Taking Good Notes. You can find that in community as well. I've just put a link to it in the chat window. And let's just kind of think through a couple of the things to capture. You want to find out the reaction to our asks, both the primary and the supporting. Do they agree? We want to know so we can follow up and obviously fulfill their promise on any of those areas of interest. Concerns, what do they voice about, any barriers or hesitations with our policy? Questions that they had about the policy. Recommendations that they had about who else to reach out to engage or to improve our policy. Points, about our strategy, found that you found interesting or that the member or the staff were recommended. What was the tone of the meeting, right? Were they engaged? Were they dismissive? Were they leaning in? Were they looking at their watch the whole time? Were they hostile, right? we want to pick up on their body language and discuss this with others after the meeting, as well as really get your impressions to make sure that they match the larger teams. You also want to highlight and flag action items that the member or staffer has asked our volunteers to commit to for your group. And Sabrina is actually going to jump into that in just a moment. But what I'd love to do first is think about a new role, or really an expansion of a role this year that we have called the time monitor. So this role at the beginning of the meeting is the person that asks how much time we have for the beginning of the meeting. We want to make sure to be upfront about that. And new this year, that time monitor also is going to note throughout the actual meeting how much time the member or the staffer is talking compared to CCLers. Are we just a fire hose of information 90% of the time, or are they actually actively participating and engaging in a back and forth dialogue, right? We also want them to tally the number of open-ended questions that the team asks to really engage and draw out the member or the staffer's thoughts more. That time monitor also signals the team when there's 5 minutes or whatever length of time your team agrees to ahead of time that remain. And they also really, at this point, really key in on something that I think we all have concerns about. And, maybe tonight's information is an example of that even. We all get stuck talking with people for too long and we don't have a gracious way out, right? So this time monitor role really provides that ability by reading body language and, whether it's closing your notebook or indicating that the next meeting is about to show in, it's okay to wrap the meeting up, even if you haven't gotten everything in yet. Pivot, you can go on to the next element. You don't want to feel rushed, and the whole goal is to leave them wanting more and a reason for us to come back to that second date, if you will. I'll pass it back to you, Sabrina, to talk about some of these other roles.
Thanks, Brett. So the appreciator really can set the tone for the meeting. We often open up our meetings by expressing genuine gratitude. So we really want to find something that we can genuinely say thank you to, that the member of Congress has recently accomplished. So if possible, a constituent really should serve as an appreciator. It will mean that much more coming from a constituent. Research the appreciation well in advance of your meeting. Find something you genuinely appreciate about them. It doesn't have to be on climate. And showing appreciation just sets a positive tone that disarms folks who might have a misconception of us. It basically takes the chip off your shoulder, and it really does wonders in just setting a great tone to begin our meetings.
Here's a little, philosophy for everyone tonight too. If a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, did it make a sound? Well, what about this? What if a meeting happens in DC and no one follows up on it? Should we expect anything to happen, right? So let's think about another important role, and that is the person that does follow up. In general, this is probably the liaison if they're in the meeting, because they're situated to do that follow up best and carry the relationship forward. Sometimes, another team member might actually make a better fit. Occasionally, that might even be somebody that clicks, like Sabrina was talking about, with your member or the aide during the meeting. They might be the best person to follow up. You also want to make sure in that kind of final wrap up to drop off your thank you card, to do the notes, and to be politely persistent if they don't respond in that follow-up. Many of these offices, as we know, and Sabrina will follow in just a little bit, they're completely overwhelmed, right? In this digital era where everyone's active in their democracy and participating. And appreciate persistence is a key goal, once a week to really follow that up and being reminded. I'll pass it back to you to really focus in on that, Sabrina, of what those kind of details might be.
Thanks so much, Brett. So lastly, we have the leaver, and that's the person who leaves that one-page ask behind, right? Our one-page ask is the only thing we leave behind. And so please make sure to leave it behind. And it should be the very end of the meeting. So you can bring other materials, but don't offer to leave it behind, right? As we discussed in the transformative power of citizen advocacy, congressional staffers have way too much to do. Congressional offices have received anywhere from 200 to 1,000 times increase in constituent communication in just the past decade alone. By law, members of the House are limited to 18 staffers since the 1970s. So you can see that staffers are just really overwhelmed. So we don't really want to overwhelm them. If I mean, if we can leave it with a positive sense of what CCL is about, we've accomplished much, right? And by giving them a lot of stuff they didn't want, that's not going to help our case any. So anyway, the other point that we have to remember is that most staffers are millennials, so they much more prefer electronic documents than a printed copy, right? So if they don't ask for a specific resource, they probably won't read it. And if they do ask for one, 9 times out of 10, they'll want an electronic format. So we really only leave that one page primary ask behind to avoid overwhelming them. That said, it doesn't mean that we don't bring other things. So for example, you might want to bring copies of like things like you might want to bring additional resources such as there's like a religious booklet that sometimes we bring, and like the media package to show them the publications that the constituents have had. And of course, we do bring and leave behind the constituent comments forms. Those we certainly want to leave with them. And I like to put the most sincere letters on top. I may even read an excerpt out loud to the staff members. The next step after the meeting is that you need to do a debrief. So after you leave the office, scoot down the hall to do the debrief. Avoid standing near the entrance of the member's office for obvious reasons that they might overhear us, right? So while the volunteers have the meeting fresh in their mind, the note taker should read out the notes, starting with the general impression, right? Did everybody get the same general impression on where the members went from beginning to end the meeting? So you also want to confirm the following follow-up: who will write and deliver the thank you cards, who will file the meeting reports online, who will send the requested information to the member of Congress or staffer, who will post about your visit on social media, who will generate a letter of thanks to the editor, a letter to the editor to mention the member of Congress by name and perhaps thank that member of Congress. So many volunteers bring thank you notes, and some of some of the people I've lobbied with have been really thoughtful and actually brought like thank you notes with iconic pictures of the region. So during the debrief, it's very efficient to write the thank you notes right then and there and have everybody sign it, and then one person can pop right back up into the office and give it to the receptionist. So it is really important to practice, but we don't expect you to be professional lobbyists, right? But you know, having a lot of practice, you guys will just impress the staffers, because they'll be so stunned that we lived up to our reputation of being one of the most well-prepared citizens groups on Capitol Hill. So practice and having clear meeting plans demonstrate that you respect their time, because we come in with an ask, and then we ask them what the barriers are to getting to that ask, whether it be co-sponsorship or something else. So if you carve out just a little time for practice with each other before or during a DC conference, then when you go into the meeting, you'll go into the meeting with much more confidence. So not only do you have confidence in your own ability, but you have confidence and trust with your teammates. It's a really great idea to get to know each other, get to know each other's strengths, because once we know each other's strengths, we can play off each other's strengths, right? So when members of Congress and staffers see you working so smoothly together, they'll come away with even more impressed with our capacity to make things happen, right? So when will we be able to have time to actually, you know, have these practice, right? So we'll have the bios and meeting plans to all of you by Thursday, June 6th. If you don't receive an email from Amy Bennett on June 6th, look in your spam file, because it probably just went there. She's very good at getting it on time. Your team lead will coordinate scheduling your team time to practice, but there are also a few additional recommendations to help you prepare. So if possible, reserve time on the evening of Thursday, June 6th, ahead of your travel time, and you can use a Zoom line to get together. You can familiarize yourself with each other and assign roles and do research ahead of the conference. If you arrive early in DC, feel free to use either the Cabinet Diplomat or Congressional rooms at the Omni Showroom anytime between 5:30 and 10 p.m. on Saturday. During the conference on Sunday and Monday, your team can meet during the conference breakouts. There's a schedule for it that, you know, we'll send to you. If you have any questions about your team's meeting plan, wait until the 6th so that you know the appropriate meeting lead to contact. Once you've contacted your team lead after June 6th, then you can ask Amy at citizensclimate.org if you have any remaining questions. Practice as a team, but also practice your part in front of the bathroom mirror. You really be surprised how helpful it is to talk to yourself out loud. Remember this, plan must always be flexible. So follow your team lead into the meeting and be ready to think on your feet. And literally sometimes on your feet, because sometimes you won't even have a room to have meeting with and you'll be out in the hall thinking on your feet. Each meeting is one step in a process of winning allies, and what isn't accomplished in one meeting can be worked out in another, as long as we leave them with positive feelings about who we are.
And I'll just say this too. I know, Sabrina, you've got a kind of powerful story of your own to close us with here. But, you know, for those that are especially showing up for the first time, given that we're going to wait till the 6th to find out the actual assignments, start thinking about what role you would feel most comfortable taking on right now. You can already practice that role. You can advocate in the meetings to have that assigned. Chances are, you know, you already know at least one of the meetings that you'll be assigned. That's your own constituency. So you can do the research ahead of time that we highlighted on your member of Congress and any of the biographies that you'd be interested in, as well as any of the other questions that you might have with some of the studies, the meeting plan templates, and the different reports that we've highlighted. So there's lots of ways to really plug in, even though you won't get the final details of the meeting time, location, and office until the 6th. And we'll stick around the questions, you know, after the top of the hour here if people wanted more clarity on that. But let's close with just a real world reflection, and I'll pass it back to you, Sabrina, on how this really played out for you in one of your first meetings.
Thanks, Brett. So as a volunteer, I've been really impressed with how well CCL's communication practice can be internalized and used in the halls of Congress. I never thought that I'd be doing what I've been doing, because I've always been shy, and I never thought I'd be actually in Congress and be talking to members of Congress. So anyway, several years back, this was my third DC conference. It was a November lobby day. And I was asked to be part of a CCL team for a freshman congressional office. We had never met with this member of Congress before because she had just been elected that year. And I was tasked with finding appreciation to give to her, because I'm not a constituent, but they thought, well, anyway, the head of the team asked me to do the appreciation. So since she had been only in Congress for 10 months, so there wasn't much of a congressional record. So I connected with her on, you know, I never actually got to do the appreciation because of the way the meeting turned out, but my plan was to connect with her on raising 2 mixed race kids. We both have 2 mixed race kids, an appreciation of the natural beauty of our states. She spoke a lot about how wonderful the state is and how much she appreciated natural resources. And I definitely do the same for Maryland. So anyway, despite the fact that our states are 2,000 miles away, and despite the fact that she's a Tea Party favorite, and I'm definitely not a Tea Party member. So in other words, I saw her as a mom before, you know, trying to do good for her children and their future before, you know, I thought about anything else about her, right? So we were unsure we were going to meet this member of Congress, and we were told that she was going to try to spend 5 to 10 minutes with us sometime during our meeting. Well, I happened to get to her office early and found out that she did have time for us, but the 10 meetings were before the scheduled meeting. So nobody else was there. So I ended up having a one-to-one with this freshman Tea Party favorite, right? And I was really nervous at first, but I remember what CCL said about focusing what's in front of me, so I did. And what I remember from that meeting was that she first started out sharing with me her frustration about the EPA. And I did listen. So she basically spoke 5 minutes with me, just, you know, nodding and confirming things and keeping eye contact with her. So after 5 minutes about hearing about why she was frustrated about the EPA and its burdensome regulations, I said something like, yes, regulations can be burdensome, complicated, and ineffective. That is why we are advocating a bipartisan proposal that is market-based. Would you like to hear the basics of this proposal? This member of Congress said yes, and I was able to tell the basic in like a minute, right? Or maybe 2. Anyway, she got really excited. And she got so excited that she sort of had to stop. She looked at me, made herself pause, turned to her aide and said, let's have a town hall meeting about climate change. I was really taken aback because this member of Congress had never mentioned the word climate change in her campaign and won by never mentioning the word, right? So that to me, I was just like, wow. So I saw her pull herself back from the excitement. I mean, she was literally as excited as I had been about carbon fee and dividend. And I get really excited about carbon fee and dividend. And I saw her pull herself back from being excited and basically need to check that her constituent cared by saying, let's have a, town hall meeting, right? And that, I was just so blown away. That's like my most powerful moment in members of Congress. It wasn't even with my member of Congress. And I figured if you can have an effect like that to somebody who's not even your member of Congress, anyway, you guys can do a lot. So,
all right, so thank you so much, Sabrina, for that great story. We're almost done with tonight's webinar, and before going to questions, we're going to wrap up with the setup for an actual practice of what this might look like in a communications exercise. With each of these lobby training webinars, we're including a demonstration of advanced listening and communication skills. So let's actually put listening and asking open-ended questions into practice. We can practice our laser talks, we internalize facts and messaging, but we also need to be continually in the art of practicing asking questions, identifying values like Sabrina highlighted, and showing curiosity even and common ground in the views of the people we're meeting with. So the precise topic and content of our activity we're about to model isn't the important part, right? Rather, what's important here is the adaptive process that Sabrina, our CCL volunteer in this demonstration, will use to draw out more information from the person that she's actually going to be meeting with, which is me. So to listen carefully to what Sabrina does to draw out more information and to identify values and to determine when it's okay to proceed, listen in. I'll be the member of Congress. Sabrina, again, is the CCL volunteer. And our situation is that CCL's volunteer has just mentioned the Energy Innovation Act. All right, action.
So we propose a fee on fossil fuel starting low at $15 per metric ton and steadily increasing.
My boss is not going to go for that. No way.
Thank you for your honesty. Can you tell us about what's behind the no way?
Look, I think we all get we need to do something. However, I know that he's worried about China and India, for example. If the U.S. is the only one who does this, it's going to kill our economy and empower theirs.
It sounds like supporting American businesses is important to you and your boss.
Of course. Yeah, we need strong business community in the U.S. if we want a healthy economy. China has lots of people willing to work for a lot lower wages, and that puts us at a manufacturing disadvantage as it is. If we increase our own energy costs, then more businesses we're only going to see are shipped overseas.
Keeping businesses here is important to me as well. So thanks for mentioning it. Do you have any thoughts on how the U.S. might get China and India to come along?
Well, I know this. My boss doesn't think the U.S. can regulate China, right? Subsidies don't cross borders either.
Yeah, I've been scratching my head on that question too. It seems like through regulations, we're already raising the cost of energy here in the U.S.
We would love to find something that levels that playing field for U.S. businesses.
We really appreciate the conversation about a level playing field for all nations because it's something we put a lot of thought into as well. Would you like to hear about what we've learned?
Sure. Now, we'll just break the fourth wall here for a little moment, and hopefully you picked up on how Sabrina was asking questions, right, to really get more information out of me. She did so to determine what was the underlying value behind, the comment I made about China. She then agreed with that value, sought common ground, asked a couple of additional questions before really asking permission to proceed. Thinking about how that different conversation feels if immediately following my China comment, what if Sabrina were to have launched into the data about how the world is moving forward without us? I would have felt if she was just really sabotaging us, right? And I was wrong. So instead, what she did was actually steer the conversation toward finding common ground before asking permission to proceed. And at this point, I'm in a much more psychological oriented place to hear what she has to say. So for an example, let's continue on this meeting, with the question we actually received earlier today for tonight's presentation. Some members of Congress might raise this question: shouldn't I prioritize raising the gas tax over a carbon fee? Raising the gas tax and replenishing the highway trust fund is going to help us rebuild our infrastructure and create jobs. A big focus right now. What's the best response to this? Well, members of Congress might take the position they can't do both. And here's a role play responding to that situation to wrap up our demonstration tonight.
I hear a couple of things in your response. You want to fix the gas tax so it sufficiently funds the highway trust fund and we can get roads and bridges repaired and built. You like the idea of a tax that actually results in job growth. Have I got that right?
You got it.
I'd like safe bridges and roads. I can agree with you on that for sure. I love it when tax helps create jobs. I was surprised to learn that the Energy Innovation Act actually creates 2.8 million jobs in 20 years. The Energy Innovation Act results in Main Street long-term jobs like retail and healthcare. What causes you to think you've got to choose between a gas tax to fix the highway system and an energy innovation which gives people money back?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious. Nobody's going to want us to raise the price of gasoline twice.
It sounds like you're concerned about the political viability of price increases.
You could say that, yeah.
We appreciate political viability issues. That's why we have 3 groups in our district with volunteers writing letters to the editors, meeting with local leaders, and giving presentations to club and faith groups. Here's a stack of local leader endorsement asking you to support the Energy Innovation Act. Here are the letters to the editors that were printed in our local paper over the past 6 months since our last visit with your staff. And here are letters from constituents who have given us to bring to you. I love this first letter. It says, "Dear Representative Smith, my cell phone is filled with pictures of my grandkids. Each time I click on the phone, I see their faces, and I wonder to myself what kind of world they will face if we don't arrest climate change and restore our planet with a stable climate. I urge you to sponsor a piece of legislation that puts a steadily rising fee on fossil fuel and returns the revenue to household. For the sake of my grandkids, I will continue asking until you do so. Thank you for your leadership. Warmly, Emma Jones."
Well, thank you very much, Sabrina. I actually will read the rest of these on my plane ride home on Thursday, and I really appreciate your time meeting with us today. So bottom line is this: if you remember 3 things, I think, at least with memories, for mine, I can't hold much more than that. So you want to be prepared, so you're clear with your ask and connect it with local and personal stories. You want to be focused. Our meetings might only last 15 minutes, so be sure to deliver that ask early and don't burn precious time, on off messages. Again, letting the conversation evolve to build that relationship after that primary ask. You want to be engaged too, though, third and foremost. Collaborate with how you can work together with the office. Don't overwhelm them and snow them with handouts. Less paper, the better. Be sure to follow up immediately. And I think the most important thing, though, to highlight is that if you have any questions that we haven't spoken to tonight or that we won't get to after the Q&A here, please feel free to use the community forums. They're active every day. We'd love to be able to use the wisdom of the crowd. We've got 130,000 smart people throughout the country in our network. Chances are somebody else is facing the same questions, issues, challenges that you are. I put a link to that in the chat window as well as my email. So please feel free to use that and leverage that for any of the questions that you have. And we just want to thank you. You're the reason why CCL is successful. You're the reason why we've been able to move the dial that we have and will continue to have the success on the hill that we will this June. I'll pass it to you, Sabrina, to close us with a quote.
So this is a quote from a CCL volunteer from the end of year appeal. She said, "Citizens Climate Lobby has taught me how to be a more effective citizen and advocate. I am grateful for the hard work of thousands of CCLers around the world. You help make the vision of a livable world for all future generations into a reality. I can't think of more important work." Thank you.